are we feeling this morning?
I think we need some more coffee in here.
I think so. Well, today's conversation is going to be about one of the most important and yet often underestimated drivers of organizational performance. And so today, I want to introduce you to Jamie, who has spent his career helping organizations strengthen employee experience, build trust, and create the conditions for performance at scale. And we're going to explore why transparency matters, how trust is built, and what role HR and leadership play in turning employee experience into a business advantage. So happy to have you here.
Thanks so much, Diondra.
So I want to start with a business case, right? Everyone says that trust matters, but executives are also under pressure to deliver results and transformation. So why should companies invest in trust as a business discipline and not just this cultural value?
This is a good question. And when I think about trust, I associate trust directly with psychological safety. And we were talking earlier, or specifically around how to engage our employees. And one of the things that we spoke about is, I think organizations focus too much on the engagement of employees and not enough on the enablement of employees. And enabled employees actually drives engagement. And the reason why I associate this with trust is that trust is one of those areas that effectively enable employees. Through psychological safety and trust, we get employees who obviously feel more valued. They feel as though that they have the freedom to do their jobs and make mistakes. And ultimately, this drives higher productivity and higher performance. So trust is absolutely crucial in driving performance, both of the individual and of the organization.
Absolutely. I love the distinction between engagement and enablement. And
100%,
I think
yeah.
We've got to take it that step further, right?
Yeah.
Engaged to enabled and engaged. And so I want to talk a little bit about your experience. And in your experience leading through transformation, what have you seen as the real building blocks to creating a trust in the environment?
Another great question. As leaders in organizations, as HR executives, HR leaders, it really doesn't matter what level you are. If you're an employee in a company, the way that you go about creating trust from a leadership perspective is by being physically present and making yourself accessible. One of the greatest stories that I had heard, and it's something that stuck with me, is the head of sales, the global head of sales for Salesforce. Every single Friday, regardless of where they are, if they're on a beach drinking a Corona, or if they're in a sales meeting or at a client meeting, they are recording a message. It could be a 30-second video, it could be a 5-minute video. Again, they could be on the beach, but they're doing it and they're communicating with their employees and they're doing it consistently. So the consistency in communication is absolutely crucial. And then the authenticity of the communication is crucial as well. So that's why, this guy may be reporting the financials and the numbers of the business, or he may say, I'm on vacation, but I just wanted to say hi and tell you guys about this wonderful beach that I'm on, and you should come here when you get time off, PTO. But this is what's really important. It's the consistency in communication, and being transparent and authentic.
And I think that can be difficult, right, when our teams are so spread out. I'd like to see a show of hands if you have a team that is geographically distributed. Right.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to hear more about that. Now, I want to challenge you a little bit. And, trust is easy when we're always delivering good news. Now, when it comes time to communicate things like uncertainty or bad news, right? How can you communicate in a way that's candid and authentic to deliver that?
Yeah, so and this applies to not just bad news, but it also applies to any sort of change activity. I strongly believe in my experience leading HR functions, both for D&G, Montclair, as well as Informa Markets, it really is about involving the employees through the process. Involving leaders, employees, whatever level. The more that you involve them in the change or transformation, or if there is bad news, involve them in why, what has caused the bad news to ultimately occur. The more that you involve them, the more that they're willing to accept what the bad news is, and the more that you involve them in the solution creation. Also, really creates a stake in themselves of how dedicated they are to the organization, but also to the solution. And so they're a part of it. They're a part of the problem, but they're also a part of the solution. I find that really has the greatest impact.
Absolutely. That ownership and that feeling like, we're in this together no matter what, the bad times and the good times.
Exactly.
And so let's switch over to more on the employee experience side. And sometimes there's a gap between what the employer thinks that employees need versus what the employees are actually experiencing. And so how is it that you're able to create an environment of trust and also close that gap?
Yeah. So I have a diverse workforce. Pretty much everybody in this room has said that they have a diverse workforce in terms of from a geographical perspective. One of the things that I find most crucial is physical presence. I'm very fortunate because the T&E budget sits under me. So, I get to put some money in my back pocket to ensure that I have enough T&E to actually travel to the fields, be it distribution centers or, in my case, physical points of sale locations, brick and mortar stores. And I make sure that I hit every single store at least once a year and all of my major locations, particularly I would say, Southern Florida, Texas, California. We're moving up into Canada, into Toronto and Vancouver, is key. So being physically present. And it's interesting because when I am physically present in my locations and my stores, because I have sales professionals and managers in these locations, I tell my team as well, put your phone down, put the computer down. It's not about being on your phone or answering the email. It's about being physically present with the employees and the leaders, and being on the floor as well. So it applies to whatever industry you're in, right? It can be your finance team. It could be if you have if you have a distribution center, it's being with the employees and that being your primary agenda. Nothing else. Mm-hmm. When you make that your priority and you make them your priority, this sounds obvious, but we don't often do it as much because we're so busy. It creates a lasting impact and it builds trust. Mm-hmm. It builds trust because you care. I remember years ago, I was working for a company called Informa. They're a major trade show and conference producer. They're based out of London, and we put on this big, huge show in Las Vegas called Magic, which is it actually stands for the Men's Apparel Guild in California. So many moons ago, it started in California when folks used to wear, Levi's and denim and all of that when they were in the fields and crops and everything. Mm-hmm. And it transformed into what is now the world's largest fashion trade show. Oh, wow. In Las Vegas. And I would go 5 days before the show started, and I'd go with, shorts and a t-shirt, and I'd say, all right, put me to work. Help me. I want to build the show. How do I build the show? And then, no, you don't need to do that. You're the head of HR. No, I want to, though. I learn because it's important for me to learn what the employee experience is, but then it also gives me insight as to the effort and that goes into actually putting on one of these shows. And so from an HR perspective, I think, okay, workforce planning, workforce optimization, what are my employees really experiencing, and what does it really mean? So it builds trust, but it gives me ammunition and information when it comes to budgeting and forecasting personnel and FTE. Wow.
And so you alluded to being very busy, and knowing you in this short term, you are very busy.
Yeah.
So being able to still be present for the employees and be there for these sorts of events, what are your personal strategies for balancing your time?
Yeah. So first of all, you need to give yourself time. You need to give yourself grace, and you need to make sure that you take care of yourself. And it's something that I can say for many years of my career. I've been in HR for 25 years. Earlier in my career, as we all were, right? We're working to prove ourselves, and we're working hard, and we're putting in the extra hours. And what I have found is in doing that, and not necessarily expecting it of your employees and your teams, it actually sends a bad message if you don't make sure that there is a break and that there's a cutoff. Being accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is not a good thing with employees for employee engagement and really enablement, because what you're doing is you're telling the employees that work-life balance is not important. So I make it a purposeful decision to say, you know what, unless the world is burning down on the weekends, enjoy your time off. After, pencils down at night, if it's an emergency, of course, I'll text you, I'll call you. But other than that, I don't want emails. And I don't send emails after a certain period in the evening. I do the delay send. And my employees, I think, they appreciate that, But I do it with everybody in the company, not just my direct team. I do it with Team One, so the Patrick Lencioni Team One, concept of all the colleagues that I have. So the other exco members, I send emails at night, but have them delivered at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that helps. It helps. So it creates this sense of work-life balance. People know that I'm doing it, but they appreciate the fact that they're not getting the emails all hours of the night.
I do that too. That's one of my favorite features. Anybody else do that?
The delay sends, it matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can do it on your iPhone too. I didn't realize I just discovered this feature.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that one either. Okay, so you mentioned enablement again. So I want to bring the conversation back there because we started off the conversation there. So differentiating employee engagement and employee enablement. And so what are your strategies? How do we get there? How do we take employee engagement and then enable the employees to succeed?
Right.
How do we do that?
So how many folks in this room run, or your organizations run, employee engagement surveys? Right. How many of those people that raise their hands feel that the employee engagement surveys truly have an impact on the overall engagement of the employee population at the end of the day? Okay, so maybe about a third of those that rose their hands. The thing with employee engagement surveys, they're very, very important to measure the engagement of the employee population. But the challenge is that I feel as though that we're skipping to sort of the end goal, right? And I sort of alluded to this earlier. Engagement is a result of actions that are taken or not taken thereof, if engagement's lacking. For me, it really is about how enabled our employees are. So are we giving them the effective tools, resources, skills, training, work-life balance, time off, total rewards, compensation, right incentivization? Are we giving them, in my world, products? We had a conversation a number of weeks ago, and a certain product category was not selling through. And we were on a call, and we had made a big investment in this buy in merchandising, and we don't understand why it's not selling. Why is it not selling? And I'm sort of the person who says, well, a couple of questions. Did we put the product out too early? Like, is there not a demand for the product at this point in time? And it turned out to be the case, because this was in February. The company was launching spring summer, had sandals out. People were not on spring break yet. They were not buying sandals. We have all these sandals out. There's an issue. So it's impacting my employees because we're pushing these products that aren't actually selling. Clients, customers don't want them just yet. Or conversely, we had expected to launch product and this product had not arrived yet. This happens a lot with production delays. And so my employees were not earning the commission, the variable comp that they had expected to earn as they should be earning. So, when I think about it, even from a product perspective, if we're not giving them the right tools, and product is a tool for them to do their jobs, to engage the client, but then to also earn commission, their total cash, we're not enabling them. These are examples of how effectively we're enabled. Do you think those folks are engaged? They're not going to be engaged, right? Because the company is not giving them the tools and resources that they need to do their jobs well. And so it really is shifting the lens around, are we giving them what they need, and how is that driving the engagement? So that's why engagement surveys are important, but before you do the engagement surveys, focus on how enabled they are.
I couldn't agree more. And I think when it comes to engagement surveys, we've seen them done wrong so many times, where if you're on the you're on the receiving end where you're filling it out, you're looking at the survey like, well, this is not accurately capturing how I'm feeling right now. Or it's on the other end of it, you're just looking for a number. As long as we get minimum 75%, then we're okay, without actually looking at the problem. And then for me, in the L&D world, doing that needs assessment to figure out where the gaps are, what are the resources that you actually need, there's some magic in that, trying to figure that out to make sure, because sometimes employees are not going to tell you what it is that they need for enablement. So it's great that you're asking the right questions and not just taking the things that are happening at face value in order to give them what they need to succeed.
For sure.
Now, we talk a lot about HR having that seat at the table. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. So the question becomes, what are we doing with that seat, right? We want to have some contribution to decision-making power. So how should HR show up differently if HR is to be seen as a true business driver?
Okay. So I think I'm going to jump around a little bit based on our conversation. How many folks in this room are just darn tired of hearing, does HR have a seat at the table? I am. I'm tired of hearing it. Because we do have a seat at the table. We do. It's what we do with that seat that really matters. And what I'm saying sounds obvious, but I was thinking about that. I was invited to an event in Carnegie Hall a couple of weeks ago, and it sort of hit me because I saw the conductor. I saw all these amazing instruments and these amazing players. And then I saw the conductor, and the conductor really was, while they were not playing an instrument, they were hearing the music and figuring out how it was playing, and they were really, we know what conductors do. They were giving instructions, nonverbal instructions to the players of these beautiful instruments. And that's our job in HR. Right? We are the conductors of the orchestra. That is our job. Nobody knows better in an organization how the organization functions. Nobody knows better how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. So I strongly believe that forget seat at the table, we're running the table. We're running the orchestra, and that's how I think of it, right? And the power that we have, or the influence rather that we have, is because we do. Nobody knows the organization better than we do, not even the CEO. And so that's where the power of influence comes into play, and where this running of the orchestra really comes in. And I strongly believe in this. I really do. And I think it's made me successful. That and curiosity. I'm curious. I want to understand. I explained this challenge that we had from a merchandising and product perspective. Help me understand, what was the decision? I'm not judging. I don't know. I'm not a merchant. So what was the decision to buy that product and to put it on the floor when we did? Why? And you learn a lot. I learn a lot about things that I don't necessarily know. But again, I take this information, I store it in my head, and it impacts what I do when I think about workforce planning, which is an area that I'm super dedicated in, how that workforce plan and workforce optimization impacts personnel cost and payroll percent and impacts the EBITDA of the organization. I'm constantly thinking about that and overall productivity, but it gives me resources and tools to make sure that, again, back to enablement, that my employees have the tools, have what they need to do their jobs effectively. And I can engage in conversations around this, but I'm curious about it all.
And the funny thing is, curiosity has to be grounded in trust, because you can be curious, but without having built that trust, you might not get accurate information.
Yeah.
And so maybe you could share a tip or two on how, maybe it's a communication strategy on how to be curious, but also maintain that trust so that you can get access to this information that supports your job.
Yeah, I do. I have a lot of one-on-ones, not just with my own team, but with Team One. Patrick Lencioni's team one, and I use him. I talk about Lencioni a whole lot, and I do one-on-ones with my peers. And the one-on-ones, it's a two-way dialogue. It's not HR meeting with marketing. It's two peers meeting together to say, hey, what's on your plate? Here's what's on my plate. Outside of the leadership meetings that we have. Because, with the leadership meetings, there's always, things go kind of haywire. You have a list of things that you need to get through, but you don't really get to know someone and get to know what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so I meet with them once a month. And then there's the casual conversations that we all have, the water cooler talk or the coffee talk that we all have. And that matters, and it builds trust. And it's because it is in a private, closed environment. We'll go for a coffee, we'll go for water, we'll go for a glass of wine at the end of the day. And I dedicate that time to them because I want to understand, I want to learn. I want to learn what they're doing. It makes me a more impactful human resources leader when I understand what the marketing strategy is and what we're doing from an influencer standpoint. Why? Because again, I go back to how is this supporting my employees' productivity and how is it supporting their performance? And so if I understand that we have a big push, a big marketing push, I go to the head of retail and say, hey, we have this big marketing push. I just met with Brett. And should we think about some sort of special spiff incentivization for the employees to drive engagement, excitement over the next weekend? And it works. And that's what builds trust, because I'm interested in their job. I'm interested in what they're doing. And then ultimately it impacts the employees. It's all about enablement.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and looking ahead, and like Julie mentioned, we're heading into unprecedented times of change, constant disruption, and we're being pressured to deliver results. So as there are more and more workforce shifts and rising expectations from employees, what is the one thing leaders and HR teams must get right if they want to build lasting trust and create organizations where people and performance thrive together?
Okay, so I was just going to recognize and congratulate this conference for, we've been on for only about a half hour so far, and artificial intelligence has not come up once. and that kind of makes me happy, because I was at a conference recently and the scent had artificial intelligence in it. It was all over the place. I was tired of hearing, but the truth of the matter is that there's a number of answers, but we need to be sponsors of AI in our organizations. There's no question. A lot of companies now are changing the role of chief people officer to chief people and transformation officer, specifically as it relates to artificial intelligence. We are the sponsors. We can start within HR. We don't need to. We can work with IT as a partner for sure, but oftentimes within HR, we sort of run our own tech stack. We partner, but we run the tech stack. And so the more that we build artificial intelligence into our day-to-day operations as an organization, the more that we're realistic in what's happening right now within the world. And how does it build trust? Well, you make it less scary. We think about artificial intelligence. I don't know. It was really funny. I gave a presentation in New York a couple of weeks ago. And it was on artificial intelligence. Now, I am not an AI expert. I am not a technology expert. I do not know how to reset the password on my computer. I have to call IT to help me with this. So I'm giving a presentation on artificial intelligence, but really from my experience about what I've done and how I've sponsored it. And it was really, really funny because I said, and I'm all about, not self-deprecation, but transparency and honesty. And I said, and I think I was telling you this, I said to the organization, I created this presentation using AI. And I created this, obviously there's a lot of prompts and a lot of dialogue and back and forth. It's not as if it just, made a perfect presentation. But I created the presentation using artificial intelligence, and I also created the cover art of the presentation on the first slide using AI. And it was a really cool image of a robot's hand and a human hand basically arm wrestling, because it was about the role of artificial intelligence and talent. Now, why is this relevant? Somebody in the audience, it was a good thing, but I also thought she could have come up to me after, said, well, I know that you created this image using artificial intelligence. And I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, well, the robot only has 4 fingers. It was missing a thumb. And so it was, I appreciated that. It was really funny because when I looked, I had not actually noticed, I had not paid attention, I had not fact-checked the artificial intelligence enough to make sure that there were 5 fingers on the hand. But it's a true story, introducing artificial intelligence, being able to say, I don't know everything, but it is a part of what we're doing, and how do we not use AI to eliminate roles, although it might ultimately eliminate some roles, but how do we use artificial intelligence to give people time back so that they can do work that has a greater return on investment? And that's how I think about artificial intelligence, and that's how I've been really sponsoring and championing it. Anybody else have a challenge with that word? I can never say. Championing it in my organization.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I've recently read Gallup's State of the Global Workplace report, and it actually mentions that one of the biggest factors for getting ROI on AI is managerial support.
Yeah.
So the fact that that's happening for you real time and you sharing that, we really appreciate it.
For sure.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. We'd like to actually turn it over to you guys. If you guys have specific questions for Jamie, here we go.
Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns?
Okay, test. So you spoke about the importance of physical presence for HR amongst our workforce, and I think a lot of employers are in the same boat as my employer, where our workforce is distributed across North America. So given that most HR teams are running lean and mean these days, we're doing more with fewer resources than ever. How do you approach closing that gap between HR intent and the final outcome? So, we all want to be agents of change, we want to be present and engaged, but with fewer and fewer resources and a widely distributed workforce, how do you recommend closing that gap?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and to put it simply, there's 2 answers. Number 1, from a physical presence standpoint, you want to be physically present in the majority where your largest employee populations are, and then if not physically present, virtually present to some degree, through Zoom, FaceTime, Teams, whatever it might be, or you have some video conferencing technology. That's also really important. It's not as good as being in person, but it's a heck of a lot better than not having a face, to an employee audience. So that's how I go about doing that. The other answer to the question, though, is we sometimes in HR, we are like the dumping ground of everything in an organization. When I was at Montclair, I was essentially a chief operating officer. I had real estate, I had legal, I had office services, I had customer service that reported into me, and I had people in organization and omni-channel development. They were just like, who do we give this to? Well, let's give it to Jamie, right? The trick is don't take on too much. It's better to do fewer things really well than to do many things mediocre. And I'm not saying everything needs to be 100%, because I'm also a big believer in the 80-20 rule. As long as you get 80% of the way there, it's good enough. I used to live my life wanting everything to be 100% perfect, an A+ student. And then I realized if you strive for that, you're not going to get anything done in business. But fewer things at a higher level and higher quality with greater impact is important. What other questions are out there or comments? Can we get some more coffee in here?
I think there was one at the back there.
Hi, my name is Trishla. I have a very quick and a simple question. In HR, we deal with a lot of stakeholders. What is the best way and the simplest way to manage a difficult stakeholder without taking things personally and without taking things home?
I didn't quite hear the question.
Wow. What is the best way to handle to manage a difficult stakeholder without taking it personally or taking it home?
Yeah. For sure. How many nights do I lose? I do take it personally. I take everything personally, to be honest with you. My office door is usually open. I want people to come in and out. When my office door is closed, either I'm in a meeting or I'm really pissed off. Something's going on. Or how many nights do I toss and turn thinking about or replaying a conversation that I had earlier in the day? That's who I am. That's never going to change. I'm going to take everything personally to some degree because I care about what I do. Having said that, though, I also believe that it is crucial that we understand who we're dealing with. And I've dealt with some really tough internal clients in my career, as I'm sure we all have in our past and in our current jobs. It's not easy. I don't have an answer for you how to separate it. It's just knowing that it's not personal, meaning their engagement with you and how they're delivering some sort of communication is really less about you and more about them. And so I try to figure out what their issue is and what their problem is and how I can help them solve for it. And if I know that I'm doing the best that I can do, that's it. There's nothing else that can happen, and I know I've put in 100%. If they're not happy with it, that's on them. That's not on me. That's how I think about it and I approach it. We have an online question.
We do. You mentioned leadership visibility as a key driver. What other structural or operational elements have you seen that help institutionalize trust at scale beyond individual leader behaviors? I'm in the process of designing an enterprise-wide employee experience program for a large, diverse workforce, so I'm trying to ensure trust is built into the infrastructure itself, not just the messaging. I'd really appreciate any insights or lessons learned.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to, I know it goes back to transparency. So we had talked earlier, good, bad, or in between. The more that you involve your employee population in either the decision-making of the organization or how things are actually executed, how strategy is executed from the beginning, the more that you engage them or enable them with information, right, the more time, I'm just reading a thing, it's just saying that I'm over time. The more that the employees will actually trust. So it should be built into, having time with your employees should be built into the actual strategic plan process. And involving them in not necessarily coming up with our goals, but once the organization has the goals set, it's how are we actually going to deliver on them. I find that is what's most important. I've had work groups when we have a strat plan put together. We've had high potential employees who we've gotten together and we've had them come up with strategies that they've then presented to the global executive committee team as part of a development process. And that really helps. I find that builds, not only builds trust, but it builds skill set in them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jamie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.